let's start with the hard one, which is China. And I've been writing. You probably, those of you who are members, know that on Thursday, a week ago, we put out a rather rambunctious, arrogant statement thing saying the title of the piece was "China Threatens the World." That was Thursday night about 9 o'clock, and on Saturday morning they did. And so a lot of people are wondering what this all means. How do you interpret this behavior? And I'd like to do this, if I can, I'm going to try to do this from the perspective of China itself, because that's more useful than perhaps taking some other view. And in doing that, I'd like to paint a picture which I think you'll all recognize. So imagine a country of the size of China with a party in charge trying to drive an economy from a population which was living in the 19th century, essentially, if not earlier, into the 21st century in about a decade or two. Imagine how hard that is, and imagine what that means. Now, in the middle of all that, you lose the whole attachment to the Marxist idea. Oops. So now you have a communist party running the country, but you don't have a communist economic model anymore, really. I mean, you kind of do, kind of don't. And you're one of those 9 or 7 people running this thing, and you ask yourself, how do I drive this train? And the premise, which may or may not be true, you may disagree, is that if you let the GDP drop below a certain number, we've all heard the numbers, 7.5, 7.8, some number, 6, you get political revolution. So you kind of don't want that. And I'll mention that, you know, in the US or Germany or the UK, we don't have numbers like 15% per year GDP. I guess we just got 3.6 or 3.8 last quarter. That's a bit false, but nice. But when someone is a president of the United States or chancellor of Germany and it goes down to 2, what happens is that particular candidate or politician loses her job or his job. But the party maintains, the political system is still there in the morning. Maybe not in China. So imagine that the stakes are a little different. If you screw it up and you're running this thing and it goes down to 5 or 3, whatever the number is, probably lower than 7.8, you don't only lose your job, your party loses control of the country, and the political system that you represented is gone, probably. I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing, but that's your motivation. And so your motivation compared to a president of the United States or compared to the chancellor of Germany is 1,000x. It's not just your personal well-being at stake or even your sense of patriotism. It is the whole deal. And I think, given the fact this is a top-down kind of dictatorial system, the result of what I just described as a business model, as a national business model, is that the requirement to maintain that stability, the requirement to get that GDP, leads you to threat. It's a simple idea. In America, you kind of negotiate. You want to say, well, you know, China's different, or Russia's different, or Germany's different. Let's negotiate. But what can happen? You know, you might lose your job. In China, what can happen is you might lose complete control of everything and have chaos, which they've actually been through a few times. So they know. And I'm not in any way trying to apologize for bad behavior. I am trying to give us a different way of understanding it. And it is indeed bad behavior. But I want to give us a different way of understanding it, because by getting a better way of internalizing this, seeing it from their perspective, I think we get a better chance to understand how to work with them or deal with them. I don't believe it's debatable that China uses threats to achieve goals. Whether they threaten their own citizens with jail, whether they threaten their own press with extinction, whether they threaten American companies with not being allowed to trade with them unless you give them all of your IP that they want, will they threaten countries as they just have militarily. Threat is the way it works. But I hope maybe by looking at this in this way, you see threats from China in a slightly different way than you might have seen it before. It isn't just like Germany threatening America today, although perhaps, as Bloomberg said recently, it might be like Germany in pre-war 1930s. And I don't think that's a joke or some kind of snide comment. I think that was a very carefully crafted statement. And one question we have to ask is, in dealing with a somewhat dictatorial situation which is extremely threatened by change, are we in fact in the same situation? Are we dealing with a country which potentially is like having that relationship that England or America or France had with Germany in the 1930s? Is that true? I wish and I hope that our media get some balls, because we need to be able to talk about what really is happening in China and between China and the rest of the world, not in a kind of a celebrity way or a scary way or a kind of a newsy way. We really have to understand the differences and state them cleanly and state them clearly. And when something is done which we think is, well, imagine again if you were in the 1930s and suddenly it's crystal knocked. You say, oh, well, they're different from us. I hope not. Hope not. And we have to have the courage to say, oh, if you just killed these people, or if you just did these things, you destroyed this place, or you threaten your neighbors, this is serious. And we recognize the chance for a country to go awry, and we don't want you to go awry. Let's say we're your friend, and we do not want you to go awry. So how can we be clear enough with you so you don't? And I think that's kind of where we are right now. So when we hear the word threat or see threats done, that's kind of the issue. If we look at it this way, what we see is the things that drive China are their business model, really. And I'm a big believer in this. I think when you're looking at a company or a country, you really have to look at the business model to get it, to understand behavior. And the other part of this equation for me in understanding China is to look at what Xi Jinping ran on in his campaign, which was the China Dream. Who has heard of the China Dream? Not too many. Well, that's the most important thing in China. And when I say, what happens when you take Marxist economics out of communist China, what are you left with? Imagine what you're left with. That's a pretty interesting question. What do you have when you make that subtraction? And whether it's, I've said this before, whether it's China or whether it's Russia, what you're left with is a void. Define what it means to be Chinese. What does it mean to be Chinese? It's not the old thing. They're under Mao. So what is it? It's the same problem in Russia. And the greatest problem right now that Putin has and that Xi has is that they need to have a nuclear glue that makes sense of, why am I Russian? Why am I Chinese? Why would I die for this country? And I'm not sure that they have that. And I believe that that's exactly what Xi Jinping has been trying to create when he ran this campaign of my Chinese dream. And his dream of China, we ought to all be asking as non-Chinese people, what is that dream? Because that will help us understand how to relate to China. And I'll just put out some ideas of what it might be. I don't know what it is. But I think that it is, in some way or other, reclaiming the empire. I think the dream inside of China is, we were great once, we will be great again. But what does that mean? We need to know is that a military statement? Is it an economic statement? Does it mean reclaiming all of the territory ever controlled by China? It might. And you can get that map out of your drawer, top drawer, and that's a pretty big map. Does it mean global or economic dominance in some way? Is it payback for past, malfeasance by other countries? Is it the result of combining nationalism with triumphalism, with our turn? Or is it something simple like getting the Senkaku Islands from Japan? But I think it's probably all those things in some way or other. And the deeper understanding we have in asking the question of, what did you want when you ran on this idea of the Chinese dream? What is the Chinese dream? If we could actually figure that out, it probably is the most important question facing all non-Chinese nations today. And if they're not paying attention to answering that question, they're not going to solve the equation they need to solve. So we should ourselves pay attention. And last and not least, in looking at this most recent problem of the ADIZs, right, the aerospace defense ID zones, I am really struck by, so you've all seen the maps. You know where the maps are. I mean, you've seen the maps. Same picture every time. You know where the maps are. You know where the zone is. You've seen, and on that you've got things like there's a big gas deposit right in the middle of it. It goes around here, around Japan. Interferes with the Japanese ADIZ. I have not yet seen one story anywhere in the global press, we have them here tonight, on Taiwan. If you were Taiwanese and you looked at that map, I'm sure you would notice how close it comes to your borders and how it pretty much blocks all free transport between yourself and Japan and Korea and everything north. And, you know, if you were a long-term thinker and you thought the largest strategic, military, and political issue in the world of China today, perhaps in the world of the Chinese dream, is reunification with Taiwan, you might think that this map, which is pretty much a territorial claim, I think, because of the rules that are attached to the zone, which require you not only to just identify yourself, but to allow yourself to be controlled by the Chinese military as you're in that zone. That's different, for those of you who haven't paid attention to this. So this territorial claim, which is masked as an ID zone, is 8 minutes from Taiwan. And if anyone in this room thinks this is the last ADIZ they're going to see, I think they're wrong. So when they put one now down into the South China Sea, that's in the East China Sea, or another one down to the South China Sea and so forth, how many of these will it take before we have a picture of Taiwan fully isolated from the rest of the world on a legal and on a military basis? And I only say that from the Chinese perspective. From the American perspective, it isn't isolated because we aren't agreeing to it. And that's the same for Japan. And it's probably the same for South Korea. But it's certainly an interesting way of looking at this whole question, which I haven't seen written about yet. So my suggestion would be think about it from the Taiwanese perspective, not just from the Senkaku Islands, which, I mean, really, who cares? Okay, so let's go through quickly, and I will try to make this quick. Is there anything about the EU that's different and interesting? Yeah, kind of. It's really a productivity story. It always has been. And while Germany wrestles with maintaining its control of the economic control of the EU, we also have Italy failing. And that's probably the real story right now. If Italy fails, really bad things happen. And Italy is not doing anything good. Except Mr. Berlusconi did get relieved of duties. That's probably a good thing. U.S. prospects. You know, we have these great prospects, but self-inflicted wounds. And nothing I've heard indicates that we won't have the Tea Party or somebody like them trying to stop the train again in January. That's just got to be done with. I hope we get to the point where it's treasonous to decide that you want to get rid of your president. That ought to be treasonous. To decide that your party is more important than your country. That ought to be treasonous. And just get to work and pass the budget. Argue about it all night and then get it done. So our inability to do that is frightening to me. Also, we've got a lot of bank influence, and everyone knows it. I think we actually may get the Volcker Act passed. Are we going to get that passed? That's really good news. So we're probably maybe growing out of the moment when banks just controlled every darn thing living and dying in Washington, D.C., because the banks definitely don't want that to happen. But it's good. It's helpful in getting us back to the Glass-Steagall days, which actually would allow us to have fewer major disruptions. The big question in the U.S. for me is what happened in September, October? And again, there was this big number that was just floated about the third Q3 GDP. That's nice. But it's almost all inventory buildup, which means it's not real. It's anticipatory, but it's not real. It's not real sales. In fact, final sales were down. Uh-oh. And as far as I can tell, something really ugly happened in September and October, and I don't know what it was. But I'm just putting you on warning. Keep your ears up. Because my feeling is it was bad. And the early indicators and the people who I kind of trust most as leading indicators for looking at this stuff are having very bad nights. So probably we aren't where we want to be right now. And something happened just now, which might be an indicator for something worse happening next. Great prospects. We have them. Energy independence is coming up. Just don't drink your own tap water. We're getting out of the Middle East, I think, which is a lovely, lovely thought. The financial world loves American stability and will continue to invest in America, which is good. LTE took us from 23rd in broadband on the OECD list into the top 10, and generally great, good things. Japan, 2 sets of books still. You've heard me say this before. It looks like Abe will pass a consumer tax, and if he does that, that's great. He'll actually have created some sense of reform, But what he didn't count on was losing his entire nuclear energy industry. And I don't know that his planners have an answer for that. So it may well be that without the ability to have that energy at his beck and call, Japan can make the economic numbers that he was planning on making. If they don't, then that's tough. It's doubly tough because you've got these countries, China and Japan, that are both failing to meet their numbers or about to. And there's nothing better in that kind of situation than having a war or having an enemy. So just when your own screw-ups are becoming really patently obvious, it's well done historically that you turn to your people and you go, don't look at me, look at him. And so I'm deeply concerned that the lack of economic success in those two places will lead to more conflict, not less. Russia, hopeless. Just hopeless. And if you want to know how hopeless it is, go today to YouTube and look at the streets of Ukraine, where 100,000 people or more can't believe that their corrupt leader turned his back on the EU in the middle of a years-long process of becoming part of the EU. And those people, I really feel sorry for them. And if you watch Putin in his disdainful, arrogant speech this evening saying that they were deluded somehow about the problem of his influence, bad situation. UK, this is also discouraging news for me. I believe that George Osborne, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and David Cameron, you heard me here last year say, I didn't understand their future. I didn't understand their economic plan. I didn't understand how does Britain make money. I know the old Britain, I know Britain's history, but look at Britain today and then tell me, how do they make money? And I said last year, I said, I love Cambridge. I think they're full of great inventions, but essentially as a nation, I don't get it. And guess what? Neither does Cameron. So the answer, it turns out, is to turn to China and take free checks in return for any form of servility that is needed. And this is literally happening as we talk. So Britain has been not only willing to put all of the Huawei equipment into their infrastructure for some money less, and to take Huawei's assurances that it's not a security problem, because they have a security testing lab paid for and run by Huawei to tell them that. But also, Huawei showed up with a check for about $1.2 billion and handed it in public to Cameron, and this is, 8 months ago, and it was like, great, we're done, our new best friend. And whereupon Cameron and Osborne went together 3 weeks ago to China, and anything that had to be said was said. And so the picture for me is, the writing's on the wall. I mean, Britain is really in need, and their response to being in need, of the many possible responses, seems to be pivoting to China and taking all the free cash they can get. Wow, that's an interesting response. So if they keep that up, that'll change geopolitics. India's doing better than I expected, and I'm glad they're doing it. I hope they keep it up. I've got a question about Iran. We know that Iran has North Korean nuclear scientists. We know this. We know that North Korea has the bomb. We know that. We know that the bomb tests in North Korea went from being kind of shabby and not so good to really, really good over a short period of time between device A and the next device. Why don't we think Iran has the bomb? And if you were running Iran and you wanted to test the bomb, here's the SNS pop quiz. A, test it in your own country and have America and Israel bomb the hell out of you. Or B, test it in North Korea. Take your pick. I'm picking North Korea. So my feeling is they probably have it already. Middle East and Africa, it's no longer about U.S. versus Al-Qaeda. It's really about the Shia and the Sunni. That's the fight. And the other ones just don't matter very much. South Korea's got a great future, I think. They're doing really great. It's not a model that I like. It's still info-mercantilist. But if you're asking how they're going to do this next year, they're going to do great. They'll be minting money. All in all, wealth creation still flows the same way. It flows through invention. All you have to do is track the inventions and where they go, and you'll track all the jobs. And when you're wondering about why we don't have jobs, it's because the people who own the companies put the inventions somewhere else, and the jobs followed. It is not confusing. If we want the jobs back, keep the inventions. In technology, here's the landscape. Emerging nation appetites and abilities will become the global market volume drivers. We're moving from a time of Apple-like companies to a time of Samsung-like companies. It will be a very clear qualitative change in how the tech industry works. The degradation and geographic shifting of IP returns is what has led to the loss of the middle class. This is what I call the big shift in GDP. It's the new normal. We're not going back to the old normal. This is the new normal. Jobs do follow IP. The lack of political leaders with tech abilities in the United States becomes a major hurdle, as though it weren't already. And we need to stop fighting the Civil War and move into the 21st century. Social media feeds in itself economically. Where is the money to come from? Ads? Well, who buys this stuff? We need a new way of looking at whether it's Twitter or Facebook, what do you want to look at? The question is dollars of sales per day per user. Don't give me eyeballs, don't give me page views, don't give me clicks, don't tell me how cute you are or how many people love you. Just tell me how much money they spend per person on your site per day. If we don't do that, if we don't have that structure, we'll end up, we have a bubble already, but we'll end up having a lot of investor money lost. There are reduced government funds for R&D among inventing nations happening now. We most need them there, and we have increased funding for R&D among nations whose model is built upon stealing IP. And those, you've seen the patent numbers, so these nations are registering mammoth amount of more patents than we file. But those patents aren't on a new flying car. They're on how to take what you invented and add an inch to it. And so they're derivative or utility patents, you would call them different things. Cloud versus cloud. Amazon appears poised to own this landscape. And what about cloud security? Is it really wise to put all of our eggs into one Amazonian basket? And finally, we're looking at a landscape of generational shift. It's kind of fascinating. It's maybe once in a lifetime situation. We have Microsoft, Apple, Intel, HP, Dell, Qualcomm, ARM, AMD, Nokia, all are changing who's running it at essentially the same time. So whatever was true in column A 2 years ago is going to be very different in column B. So now for predictions, and then you can argue here or go home. Now first I have a confession to make. I made 2 really stupid calls last year, which brought down my average to 94.0% from a higher number. And those calls were, one, I said that more than half U.S. households would have net TV by now. And I just can't find out. All the numbers that I see are switchers, like who switched from cable to net TV. I can't find the numbers, they're out there somewhere, of how many American households have streaming content. I don't know, on their television set. So I'm assuming that I really screwed that up. But we're probably at the cusp or close to it. Do you know? It's about half? Is it 50.01%? Okay, well, Chet would know. So that, okay, please let me know. Right now, I'm calling myself an idiot on that one. And the other one was I said that ebooks would have overtaken trade adult paperbacks by dollars, and that was a stupid call. I think we have achieved that in volume, but not in dollars yet. So that was wrong. Not totally wrong, but wrong. Okay, here we go for top 10 calls for 2014. And as you know, if you've been here before, I don't chat about these things. I just read them out because a year from now, they'll have to be right or wrong. And I'd rather at least know what they were. So the first one is series into silos. Internet assistants display their importance as a category by spreading out into a large number of new Siri-like products, many of which work to increase utility by going deep into vertical markets. The results are improved success in voice recognition, knowledge-based utility, and customer trust and acceptance. Number 2, visualization goes mainstream. As big data, cloud computing, and vast increases in storage and processing take hold, the role of data visualization becomes much more common in our tools. Having created systems much more advanced than the human brain in these categories, we now must find improved ways of digesting all of this information. Number 3, low price becomes a critical driver in global consumer electronics product creation as emerging economies absorb a dramatically larger fraction of all devices sold. The result of bringing hundreds of millions out of poverty is the creation of a new purchaser segment in consumer electronics. The result of that is the next 2 calls. Number 4, sub-$100 smartphones will dominate the phone category. And number 5, sub $250 pads will dominate the pad carry-along category. These are global. Number 6, software plays on a flat hardware field as we build out the global computer. This is the real mover behind everything in IT, from the blank black real estate of your cell phone and pad to virtualized storage and servers, emulated processors, software-defined networks, and the most advanced cloud computing services. Even as hardware continues to advance, software is where most of the energy, innovation, and action occur. Number 7, Barry, this is for you. The new Microsoft that nobody expected. Microsoft gets a new CEO with a new power structure that encourages cooperation instead of warring factions, and which leads to improved success in consumer markets. The stock continues to climb on an annualized basis, and Redmond starts to get some of its mojo back, defined by people wanting to work there. Number 8, micromapping arrives. Various firms open the door on a brand new category in mapping, advertising, location ID, and transactions. This malt category launches in 2014 with small but fast-growing revenues that will become mammoth in years ahead. Number 9, the quantified self goes mainstream. The idea of knowing more and more detail about your personal health and characteristics goes from being a science story to a jogger's delight to a mainstream market. Keeping track of your own health data in real time is no longer something for geeks and workout fanatics, but is accepted as a new and mainstream category of behavior, products, and preventative medicine. Doctors will have to start catching up. Encryption everywhere, number 10. The direct commercial result of Edward Snowden's leaks will be a massive move by large tech companies, both in enterprise and consumer markets, to evolve new encryption technologies and products that use them. While NSA proofing will be the motivator, the real benefit may be improved protection of commercial IP from theft by China and other nations. So that's 10. And by the way, I wrote that last one. This is a moving target because this is happening every night. We have a new announcement from Microsoft and Google and everybody else before that came true. And number 11 on a list of 10, this is, I think, the coolest one of all, but it's not for 2014. But this is like the coolest invention in the world. We have 3 things. We've got global warming, which means too much CO2. We've got a material cycle based on exhausting resources, which just leads to more and more expensive stuff that we're going to run out of. And we've got 3D printing. It turns out if you took the CO2 from the coal-fired plants and all petroleum-fired plants, and you made graphene out of it, small flakes of graphene could be put into 3D printers and turn them from luxury items or sport case things that are really cool in museums to things that really, really, really can make everything. Because graphene really, really, really makes everything. Everything in this room, everything in this building, everything in this city, almost, could be made out of graphene. So it takes the whole idea of 3D printing out of its current category of cute, fun, exciting, hobby, prototype, rare, to how to make everything in the world with one substance, with low R&D costs amortized across everything from tables to chairs to your glasses, to cars and airplanes. It would be the coolest thing ever. And it would solve global warming, it would solve the energy cycle, it would solve the climate change problem, it would solve the material cycle, and it would also give us something new to do and talk about. All right, I'm done. So that's it for the top 10, and I'd love to hear ideas of like what's wrong, what's crazy, what's good, what's bad. And we'll do what we do every time we do this, which is you are now officially excused from duty, and those who have to catch a train, plane, or see your family this evening, feel free to take off. And those who want to hang around and talk, we'll do that here, and then we'll do it again upstairs. So I'll just say thanks for being here, and hang around if you want to have questions and answers. Feel free. Yeah, if you're not an SNS member, sign up and we'll help you become one.